through all these exercises will gain the absolute control of the elements after more or less exercising. A magician who has established the magical balance in himself with respect to the elements, having ennobled his character and having acquired the highest virtues and ideals, will very soon attain this power. He will feel his faith becoming as firm as a rock and will be absolutely sure of his conviction, which excludes any doubt at all. On the other hand, any person who has not been working scrupulously enough, or scholars who skipped any steps and neglected exercises will feel doubtful about one problem or another, and the influence of one element that is keeping him in check most of the time will not tolerate to be mastered. Here and now the scholar will realize why such a high value is set on scrupulousness and endurance in the execution of the exercises. There is no gap allowed to spring up in the process of development, otherwise the scholar will fall behind and some of the problems could only be set right under the greatest difficulties. A scholar who is perfectly sure of his mastering the elements will soon notice that he is capable of projecting the elements on all planes very easily, outwards as well as inwards, so that all seems to be a child's play to him. Having arrived at this point, the magician can turn to transferring the power of the elements into a suitable ritual. I have talked about this problem in detail already in the chapter about the rituals. The magician forms any ritual after his own liking by means of finger positions and gestures of the hands into which he is transferring the power. According to his magical development, he will certainly dispose of a sufficient amount of intuition so that he can compose the ritual suitable to the element in question. He can provide it with a self-selected word, formula, and link it to a certain sound corresponding to the element, Quabala. It is quite impossible to make a mistake here, because the rituals are absolutely individual, purely personal. Therefore the rituals that the magician composes for this purpose are not to be imparted to anyone else. Another person could attain the same success in mastering the elements by using these rituals, which of course would happen at the expense of the power of the magician who actually composed the rituals. Supposing that a person who does not have the magical maturity makes use of such rituals, he would certainly suffer great damage, and bring ill fate to other people for whom the rituals had been used. Therefore be very careful and select only a kind of ritual that you can use in a large crowd as without anyone observing it. For example, a ritual with a finger position in your pocket. The genuine magician will regard this warning as fully justified. First of all, the magician must try to compose the ritual for an element of the astral sphere, with which he is putting the virtue of one element in operation, and at the same time another ritual with the help of which he can dissolve this power again instantly if he chooses. In the same way he ought to operate with the other three elements, thus creating by his power 8 rights for the astral sphere and 8 for the material production as well. As soon as the rights become automatic by a long period of exercising and repeating, it will be sufficient to use the ritual only, which will make the elements start working immediately according to the purpose to be accomplished. If the magician wishes the effect to be cancelled, it will be enough to use the necessary revoking rite. This method should become a habit that renders performance easy and possible without any effort or imagination at all. I mentioned before that the magician is able to achieve everything through the action of the elements in the astral as well as in the material world. To attain this state of maturity, a great amount of patience, endurance and tenacity will be required. Even then, when the scholar is developing more and more on higher levels, he ought to work at mastering the elements until he really becomes a true master, provided he is possessed by high ideals and wants to do good deeds only to help mankind. Divine Providence will bless him, endowing him with unexpected faculties to make the most of them. Magic physical training, Vi. In this step any special training of the body is no longer necessary, but we shall practically use all the occult powers that the scholar has obtained in the course of the exercises, provided he followed all of the methods scrupulously and the practices really became habits. The scholar can of course deepen the exercises to obtain a better success. It is impossible to describe the entire practice of magic that a scholar could master eventually, because it would require another volume. I will only select some of the most interesting facts from the lot. In the meantime the scholar has matured so much that he will succeed in the practice of lower magic without any exception, especially if he aims only at high and noble ideals. 1. Deliberate creation of elementals. In contrast to thoughts living in their forms in the mental or spiritual sphere, the elementals are entities with a certain degree of intelligence deliberately created by a magician. Such elementals are capable of fulfilling certain tasks on the mental plane and obviously they may be looked at as obedient servants of the magician according to the purpose he aims at, through the creation of elementals of the so-called elemental magic type. The magician can accomplish everything on the mental plane without any discrimination of his own or a strange sphere. I will quote only a few examples just because of the great variety. With the help of the elementals the magician can influence the mind of any other person. Optionally, he can strengthen or weaken man's mental and intellectual faculties. He can protect himself or others against foreign influences, transmute friendships into animosities, or the other way around, he can produce a favorable atmosphere in associating with his fellow men, and he can bring under his control anybody's will that is not yet developed or profiled. The businessman can enlarge the number of his customers, and the elementals can be helpful to him in many other ways. The genuine magician will always be inspired by good and noble intentions and keep the altruistic motive in mind if he is aiming at the highest level of magical maturity. The practice of creating elementals is very simple and an affair of the magician's imagination, but the following rules must be considered. 1. The elemental has to be given a form corresponding to the desire one wishes to be fulfilled. The form is to be created by intensive imagination. 2. The form, the so-called vessel or housing, has to be given a name of some sort. Everything existing, whether in a particular shape or shapeless, does have a name. If it has no name, it does not exist. 3. The task is to impress on the elemental with the help of the willpower and the imaginative faculty, that is, an authoritative order has to be given with respect to the kind of effect to be produced. Here as well, the present or imperative form formula must be retained in exactly the same way as I described it in the chapter dealing with subconsciousness. 4. The effectiveness is to be impressed on the elemental regardless whether it be a question of a permanent or a restricted effect. These 4 fundamental rules are to be respected if one intends to work successfully with elementals. I will render the practice even more understandable, and an illustrative case may show how it can be done. Supposing the magician intends to enforce someone's memory or any other intellectual faculty with the help of an elemental, the procedure is as follows. The magician imagines a universal ocean of light, from the luminous matter of which he shapes an enormous ball of light, compressing and accumulating it more and more with the help of his imagination until this ball has the size of approximately 12-20 inches. By this accumulation of light, the ball has become similar to a radiating sun. Now the magician impregnates this light ball with the desire and the firm conviction that it will exhibit the same power and quality as is supposed to revive and reinforce the desired mental faculty, such as memory, eloquence, etc., in the respective person. As soon as the magician has shaped this mental sun or ball, he must give it a suitable name, say Lucis or the like. Besides, he is fixing the time when this ball is to affect the mental sphere of the person with terms like these. You ought to work in the mental sphere until the person concerned has attained the desired faculty in such a way that this faculty has become a habit. Having fixed the time, the magician orders the elemental to dissolve and then return to the ocean of light as soon as it has fulfilled its task. Expressing it magically, the birth and death of the elemental are fixed in exactly the same manner as man's or any other being's fate is. Considering the fact that an elemental knows neither time nor space, it may be directed to the mental sphere of the respective person. Its sending off happens quite suddenly, as if the connecting link between herself and the elemental were torn. At the same moment, one turns to another job. One ceases to remember the elemental that has just been created. One may also accompany the breaking up with a certain farewell gesture, just as one did while creating it. All this is left entirely to the discretion of the scholar who, at this present state of development, should be quite capable of giving such and similar instructions himself. The more detached from the magician that such an elemental is, the more effective it will be in the mental sphere of the person for whom it was created. It can work independently in the mental sphere and will not be restricted in any way by the magician's mind. Now and again it is advisable to reload the elemental to give it a greater power of expansion. This is achieved by calling the elemental by the name given to it, back from the mental sphere of the person concerned, rendering it more dynamic through a new accumulation of light, and sending it off again. As soon as the elemental has fulfilled the required task, it will dissolve itself in the ocean of light. This example should suffice to give the magician a rule of conduct how to create elementals. The experiment described here often is used by adepts for the purpose of inspiring and strengthening scholars of low standard. Let us now turn to another similar topic that makes us acquainted with the so-called larvae. The difference between an elemental and a larva is basically the fact that an elemental is created deliberately by the magician, whereas the larvae form themselves involuntarily in the corresponding mental sphere as the result of a strong physical excitement, no matter what kind of excitement this happens to be. The stronger the excitement is, the more mental material a person is subsiding, the larva will become all the stronger, denser and more viable. Especially in the case of a regular and frequent repetition of the same physical excitement. This involuntary formation of larvae occurs in any human being, young or old, magically trained or not, regardless whether the person knows or ignores it. If the physical excitement is fading due to the fact that no attention has been paid to the upsetting affair, the larva too will disappear by and by until finally dissolving itself. Consequently, there will be in the mental sphere a constant bringing forth and dying of larvae, naturally at the cost of the mental matter of each human being. We are causing these events by our own psychic excitement. The reasons can be very different, usually fear, grief, sorrow, fright, hatred and envy and such like, producing them. The shape that the larva shows depends on the cause of the psychic excitement and is always symbolic. Anyone who knows something about symbolism will be able to get a clear idea about this problem. For example, a thought of love will always be symbolized by a heart, a thought of hatred by an arrow or a flash, etc. In spite of the fact that the larvae, these undesirable mental inhabitants, cannot be seen by the normal human being. They still do exist, and the well-trained magician can see them on the mental plane. In sensitive or excitable persons, the mental matter is much more separable, and the reproduction of larvae is obviously easier and more intense. Such people wreck themselves, their health, especially their nerves, but they also damage their intellectual faculties and involve other highly suggestible people too. All kinds of mass psychosis are originating here. There is no need to describe mass psychosis in detail, because everybody will have made observations and had experiences regarding this problem. The more one returns to the cause of the psychic excitement and the more attention one pays to it, the stronger the larva will become. Any larva that is condensed very strongly will show a great deal of self-preservation instinct and will try to prolong its duration of life as far as possible. For this reason, it stimulates the mind about this problem until they leave their mortal frame. Only a very few persons are actually haunted magically, victims of the past, no doubt. There is a certain advantage for the average man of the numerous inquisitions he would unconscious them, sooner or later. Next I am going to describe another group of entities existing in the mental sphere, namely, the group of the phantoms or phantasms. The difference between a larva and a phantasm is as follows. A larva is quite unconsciously adopting a shape in the mental sphere, appropriate to the motive of the single or repeated psychic emotion, whereas a phantom accepts a certain form or rigidly create larvae that might become fatal to him, or with demoniacal features, and whose outward appearance consequently gives the impression of black magicians, but who probably haven't got the faintest idea of any human science, to say nothing at all of magic. It is sufficient for any easily suggestible, emotionally excitable or rather conceited person to meet with such a type of man, whether in business or in personal concern, and our test subject, as we shall call it, will instantly have the sensation of a strong dislike and antipathy towards the antagonist. It can happen that our type is exhibiting a whimsical behavior without wanting to do so or even knowing about it. The first thought entering the test subject's mind will be that he is facing a black magician. Maybe, for some reason or other, this test person is not thinking too highly of this type of man, and the first step towards self-suggestion has already been done. Sooner or later, small awkward everyday incidents will never be cleared up, but the blame for them will be set on our type of man. From now on, the attention is stirred up, one is watching oneself, and the picture of the type becomes more distinct. Already one begins to feel persecuted. The eyes grow more glittering, his appearance reveals itself in dreams, the picture becomes more vivid and eventually emerges even in broad daylight. Finally one constantly lives under the impression of being persecuted at every turn. With the help of a very lively imagination, the picture can be condensed to such a degree that it becomes visible even to other similarly sensitive persons. Feeling persecuted in this manner, with the picture continually working on his mind, our test subject may be argued into anything, even the worst. He looks for help, begins to pray, and does his best to scare away this terrible influence. He gets nervous, breaks down, gradually becomes insane, and ends up by committing suicide or else in a mental hospital for the rest of his life. The phantom has fulfilled its task. How terrific is the shock, however, if such a spirit must convince itself in the mental sphere that it is committing a well-organized magic suicide. What a bitter disappointment. Our type man of course has not the faintest idea of what happened and will never realize that he was nothing but a means to an end. His face and his conduct were only the form, the pattern, from which our test subject created the destructive being, the phantom whose victim he became in the end. Such and similar sad examples happen more frequently than you would believe, sometimes faster, more drastically, in other cases more slowly, furtively, insidiously. But should you dare to tell the persecuted person the truth, he would never believe it because the phantom knows well how to hinder its victims from escaping. If the guiding hand of divine providence leads such an unhappy persecuted person to a genuine magician who finds out the phantom's trickery, he will have the very difficult task to convince the victim, to lead him to the right path, and to teach him a different, normal mode of thinking. At certain times, especially if the victim is under the spell of a phantom, the helper will have to interfere very firmly indeed, now and again, even drastically to restore the mental balance of the individual. The second example shows the same occurrence but with a different underlying beings with an innate scab become stronger, thriving entirely on thoughts of yearning. The more the concerned person tries to resist this unsatisfied love, the more obtrusive the phantom will become. At first it will turn up in dreams and allow its victim to revel in the most delightful transport of love. A little later it will provoke the sexual instinct and allow sexual intercourse in the victim's dreams. The pollutions produced in this way help the phantom to become denser and to influence the victim more and more. Because the sperm represents the vital power that the phantom is sucking up like a vampire. The point in question here is not the material sperm, but the animal vital power accumulated in the sperm. The victim is losing the ground under his feet, his willpower is diminishing, and the phantom gradually wins the upper hand. If fate is not so kind to such a one as to have him enlightened in good time and to find the right distraction for him, the phantom's mode of action will result in more dangerous effects. The person becomes confused, stops eating. The nerves are overexcited and such like. The love phantom can be condensed to such a degree by unsatisfied passion that it can adopt bodily forms, seducing his victim to onanism and other artificial stimulation of the genital organs. Thousands of people have fallen victims of phantoms by committing suicide as the result of disappointment in love or unsatisfied passions. This problem recalls the memory of true occurrences of the medieval succubi and the trials for witchcraft connected therewith. A very dangerous pleasure indeed. In the light of the two foregoing instances, the magician may observe the activity of the phantasms, and he will be able to form such specters himself. But do not forget, sooner or later, he always will run the risk of being influenced or mastered by them. He knows what is happening in the average individual, and how to produce these phantasms consciously in the magic way, but never will he be induced to execute such practices himself, always remembering the magic sentence, love is the love, but love under a strong will. There is one theme left to be described, that of the phantasms or shadows. Phantasms are animate presentations of people already deceased. I will pay particular attention to this theme to avoid many errors and enable everyone to sift the chaff from the wheat. As soon as a human being leaves behind the mortal frame, it is at once in the fourth state of aggregation, usually called the world beyond. Without any mediating substance, it is impossible for a being to operate on our tri-dimensional sphere, just as a fish cannot swim without water. The same thing prevails upon beings already passed away to the world beyond. Remembering, praising, mourning the deceased, any memory of or tribute to them will create and enliven imaginary pictures of the dead, which as a result of frequent repetition have a rather long duration of life. We call these pictures, created by the living ones, phantoms. It is this kind of phantom that manifests themselves in great numbers to the so-called spiritualists, evokers, diviners, etc. The spooks and hobgoblins also are nothing else but phantoms, preserving, condensing and thriving on the affection and attachment of the bereaved ones, as it happens in the case of the shadows. This can be stated without difficulty by citing a being that manifests itself in different places at the same minute at once through so-called mediums, which is nothing but a manifestation of the dead person's phantom, because phantoms can be created by the hundreds. It is very sad that these phantoms always are mistaken for the real dead person by the spiritualistic mediums. A lot of mischief, self-deception, and fraud is carried out in this line. One can observe, for instance, that one of the mediums is communicating with a famous leader or general, a second one with an artist, another with a saint, in a different place with a pharaoh, and immediately again with an angel. Therefore it is not at all surprising that this particular field of knowledge will meet with a host of opponents and mockers, because of its amount of self-deception. No wonder that a phantom has such a strong instinct of self-preservation as to present itself as a vampire to the medium or the whole circle, and indeed becomes fatal to the neighborhood as well. Of course, all this does not mean that a genuine magician who masters the fourth state of aggregation, the causative principle, would not be able to communicate with a deceased person or with an intellect that is not yet embodied. I have already quoted the practice in the chapter about mediumistic writing. Apart from that, any magician is able to form a housing, a shape, with the help of the imagination, transfer it into the fourth state of aggregation, and to persuade or even to force the true, desired being to enter this form and manifest itself to the external world. This practice belongs to the field of necromancy or conjuring magic and has nothing at all to do with the generally known spiritualism the genuine magician will use. This practice only in extreme cases, and he will not evoke a being away from its sphere. Because anything a being of the fourth state of aggregation has to say or to fulfill in the material or astral world can be achieved likewise by the magician himself through his maturity. Step 7. Magic mental training. 7. In Step 5 the scholar learned to become conscious of the own spirit, to act deliberately in the body as a spirit and also to use his senses consciously. In this stage he will consciously pursue the properties of the spirit or of the mental body, and use them as well. Here, of course, just like anywhere else, the analogy of the elements is to be considered. It has been mentioned before that the fire element can be transformed into light. And conversely, without light there would never be any reception of color for the eyes. Consequently, we could not see our eyes without the existence of light. From this point of view, it is quite obvious that the sense of visual perception is analogous to the fire element. This element, related to the spirit, shows a specific property of the will. The mental property belonging to the air element is the intellect with all its aspects, and it is imputed to the hearing. The water element of the spirit is expressed in the feeling or life. These three elements of the spirit, fire, air and water together produce the earth principle of the spirit, which shows itself in the specific quality of consciousness. The causative principle, in its simplest form, expresses itself as conscience. The magician will at once understand the great importance of this analogy if he has already developed so far as to achieve the magical equilibrium in the astral body by means of introspection. The next task he will be asked to fulfill is to analyze his spirit and to find out which of the elements is predominant in his spirit. In the case of people having a very strong will, which does not mean stubbornness, the fire element will of course be predominant in his spirit. If the intellect or the intelligence with all its aspects is prevailing in the magician's spirit, the element of air is supposed to be the stronger one. In case the magician should be above all an emotional character, the water element will play the main part in him. If he has a weak memory, the consciousness will be affected very often, and one can take it for granted that the prevailing element is that of the earth. This classification serves to establish the efficiency of the elements in the spirit and to arrange the development so that the weaker elements are balanced by suitable concentration, exercises and deep meditation. The magician must neither allow the fire principle, nor the water, air, or earth to prevail, and has to know how to classify his exercises in such a manner that the intensity of his work will neutralize the elements. Let me explain this problem in detail in the light of an example. Suppose the magician's intellect to be on a very high level, his will being weak and not quite up to the maturity of his intellect. Then he must try to strengthen his volition by suitable concentration exercises that bring out the fire principle in the spirit. He should mainly select exercises that train the eyes, exercises of optic imagination, considering that the eye corresponds to the fire element. But if the magician has a strong will and a weak intellect, we shall come to the conclusion that he has to give his keenest attention to the hearing by imagination exercises, that is, he has to choose concentration and meditation exercises that fully engage the ear. Should the magician own a strong will and a very good intellect, but his emotional life or his feelings somehow lag behind, then he will have to render his spirit more emotional, which he can accomplish through such imagination and meditation exercises that influence the feeling very strongly. If the magician notices that his astral body as well as his mental body incline mainly toward the earth element, which is to say that his thoughts come very slowly in his spirit and that he gets depressed, that indicates that the earth element prevails, and that first of all he must train his consciousness with the help of suitable exercises. The magician has to develop his spirit to perfect harmony with regard to the elements, and to choose exercises corresponding to the elements and at the same time to the senses, so that the will or volition, fire, the intellect, air, the feeling, water, and consciousness, earth, are enhanced and developed evenly. The outcome of this description is the following schedule, which I will quote for the sake of a synopsis. Element: fire, air, water, earth, causa. Sense: eyes, ears, perception, taste, smell, all in all. Quality: will, intellect, feeling, consciousness, conscience. Exercise: optic, acoustic, emotional, expand, cons. Realization: the causa principle developing from concentration. There is no need of descending to particulars. It is also superfluous to quote single exercises of concentration and meditation. According to the specific qualities of the elements prevailing in him, the scholar can easily compile them. He will select imaginations of objects, pictures, etc., for his concentration exercises if he has a weak will. After all, he went through these exercises already in step 2 of this course. The above harmony schedule is a signpost, so to speak, a compass to find out which element is preponderant and which exercise has to be taken up more intensely. As a result of success with this hermetic classification, the causa principle will reveal itself to him. Magic psychic training. 7. A very particular topic we shall deal with in this step concerns the development of the astral senses with regard to the elements. The magician's astral senses have been trained and developed in any case in the course of all the preceding exercises. Nevertheless, there is need of an extraordinary drill in cases of poor abilities for one or the other faculty, because every human being has different talents. Therefore it will be opportune to quote exercises here that enable the magician to develop the sense of the astral body fast and without difficulty. In the magic mental training of step 5, the scholar learned to become conscious of his spirit, and to act as a spirit through the astral body as well as through the material one. In pursuance of this, I will deal with one of the most fascinating problems, namely that of clairvoyance. Numerous books have been published about this theme, but the ones that have come into my hands do not offer the slightest practical profit to any magician. Therefore it is very useful, indeed, to labor very thoroughly in the field of clairvoyance. Generally speaking, clairvoyance means the second sight as it is popularly named, or the power of seeing, without the use of the eye, events taking place at a distance and in the past, present, or future, or seeing deceased people. Very few authors describe this power from a psychological or any other point of view, and that is why it shall be our next task to study the phenomenon of clairvoyance very thoroughly. First of all, the magician will realize that there are various kinds of clairvoyance. The principal kind is the inborn capacity of clairvoyance, which its bearer has been granted whether in the invisible world already, or which he brought with him from a former into his present existence. This kind of clairvoyance is the best, but very few humans enjoy it, being born clairvoyant to such a degree that they can practice it immediately without any effort at all. A second kind of clairvoyance is that which occurs spontaneously and is therefore to be regarded as a pathological symptom. A shock in the case of severe illness also can cause the capacity of clairvoyance. This usually happens in the case of people who lose their equilibrium as the result of a stroke, a nervous breakdown, or otherwise through a physical or psychic trauma where a kind of clairvoyance will occur in a more or less distinctive form as a concomitance. This sort of clairvoyance is naturally undesirable for the magician because it will sooner or later lead to a complete breakdown, which not only implies a total loss of this power, but also is detrimental to the health and very often the cause of an untimely death. Clairvoyants of this kind are very pitiable indeed, even if their success should be convincing proof. This capacity belongs to all the persons who, having a mediumistic predisposition, were induced to clairvoyance by some beings. Nor is this kind recommendable to the magic practitioner, because people like this usually end up in a lunatic asylum. A great number of persons who are taken to mental hospitals and who were meddling with spiritualism without a reliable guide can blame their hopeless condition on spiritualism, and it does not matter in the least whether the motives of this study were earnest intentions or mere curiosity or whatever else may have induced them. Another kid of clairvoyance that belongs to this group is the forced production of this power. With the help of drugs like opium, hashish, peyote, soma, etc., this will be without any interest to the magician, because most of these victims will fall prey to the addiction of these dangerous drugs, which paralyze the ethical and intellectual faculties, the willpower and finally the nervous system, injuring the health as well as the development. Such cases are recorded by the millions in the Orient, but they occur in great numbers in the Occident as well as in all the other civilized countries. The magician certainly has the opportunity, as long as he has not achieved the necessary maturity, of convincing himself of the existence of clairvoyance and other supernatural occurrences in one way or another, but usually, and that is the worst of it, he does not stop at this conviction. He too may become prey to intoxication and fall into the same condition as so many drug-stricken persons. For this reason I will not describe any method in this work that would tempt the magician to experiment on such things, but I shall only point out quite harmless methods that allow clairvoyance to occur automatically, in conformity with the spiritual maturity and as a concomitance of the higher initiation. Another kind of clairvoyance is the one that is caused by impairment or temporary loss of the eyes. Most of the books teaching clairvoyance recommend staring at an object, a magic mirror, a crystal ball, or at gems, and those are good methods, but they are not adequate for everybody. These expedients for the development of clairvoyance are useful only in the hands of a trained magician, but they must not call forth clairvoyance by stimulating the optic nerve. They are meant only to serve as a mirror to an eye that already is trained consciously. From the magical point of view, not a single dodge, however highly praised or scrupulously executed, is capable of producing the gift of clairvoyance. This capacity depends on the talents and on the psychical and astral development and maturity of the magician. Further chapters in which I shall teach how to make fluid condensers also will include instructions for the production of magic mirrors and other appliances. The magician ought not to forget that all the dodges and appliances mentioned here are nothing but poor expedients. By no means, however, are they the real factor that produces the desired result of genuine clairvoyance. Finally, I will mention the latter kind of clairvoyance, which occurs as a concomitance of the correct magical development and which is caused through the systematic display of the clairvoyant's eyes. I have resolved to quote in this book a secret magical method that has not been mentioned in any other work up to now, but which is exceedingly useful from the Hermetic point of view as well as by analogy with the laws of the elements. The practice of the development of the astral senses follows below. 1. The magic clairvoyance. Before I describe the proper exercise, I must premise that here we have got to deal with the aspects of the light. As you know, light is an aspect of the fire element, and therefore analogous to the will and the eyes. Consequently, the point of this experiment is to intensify the imagination of the light, that is, to imagine the light optically to such a degree as to grant the success aimed at. Take up your asana posture and imagine that you are inhaling the universal light, similar in form and brilliance to our sunlight, whether through the pulmonary and pore breathing or only imaginarily. Regard your body as a hollow organ filled completely with this universal bright white light. Now concentrate the quality of clairvoyance into this light in the body. That is, imagine that the light is penetrating everything, seeing everything and looking into everything. Neither space nor time is any hindrance to this light. Your conviction of this quality of the light is to be firm as a rock, and not the faintest doubt is allowed to arise. If you are a religious man, it should be easy for you to believe that this universal light is representing a part of God, who owns all the qualities described here. As soon as you have sucked in the light into your body in this manner, together with the quoted qualities, and if you can feel its tension and penetrating power inside you, accumulate the light with the help of your imagination from the feet and hands towards the head, compressing the light to such a degree that it includes both your eyeballs. You can also fill first one and then the other eye with the accumulated light as described here, if this way is more suitable to you. There are magicians who develop and enliven clairvoyance in one eye only, leaving the other eye free and undeveloped. It is left entirely to the scholar's judgment whether this pattern is worth imitating, but as I see it, it is far better to prepare both eyes equally for clairvoyance. As soon as you have performed the accumulation of light in your eyeballs, imagine that your eyes have got all the abilities concentrated in the light. Endure for at least 10 minutes in this exercise, and if you are quite sure that your eyes, which are imaginarily filled with the universal light, have also accepted the quality of this light, allow the light to disperse again. With the help of the imagination, whether directly from your eyes into the universal ocean of light, or to enter your body in its original form, and from there to dissolve in the universal light. Both the methods described here are equally good, and the outcome will be the same. The important point is that the eyes will become receptive again in the normal way as soon as they are set free from the light. This is necessary for the simple reason that the astral eyes of the magician, when developed in this manner, will not become oversensitive so that they would not be able to discern what normal eyes or the clairvoyant ones are seeing. Supposing that the magician failed to dissolve the concentrated light, his eyes probably would remain clairvoyant and he would hardly be able to distinguish between material and spiritual matters. Therefore he ought to have his power of clairvoyance well in hand and allow it to become effective only if he thinks it desirable. By frequent repetition of this exercise, the magician will achieve such skill that he can allow his clairvoyant eye, the so-called light eye, to function in a few moments. Eyes prepared in this way, whether closed or open, can see anything the magician wishes to, whether in a crystal globe or in a magic mirror. His clairvoyant eye will see everything. The quality of clairvoyant perception then depends exclusively on the purity of his character. An excellent remedy contributing to a quicker success and influencing the physical eyes very favorably, so that people suffering from bad eyesight or stricken with an eye complaint can profit from not only the magical point of view but from the sanitary one as well, is the preparation of a magical ophthalmic fire lotion. The following ingredients are necessary. 1. A large bottle of distilled water. 2. Chamomile flowers, dried or fresh. 3. Eyebright, dried or fresh. 4. 7 9 osier or hazel switches which you can find in fields. Strip the leaves, then dry the sticks in sunlight. 5. Filter paper and a small funnel. Now you can prepare the eye lotion. Pour a half pint of distilled water into a clean container. Boil it, then add 2 teaspoons of chamomile flowers and 1 teaspoon of eyebright. Let them boil for only a few seconds, then take it off the fire and cover the pot with a lid. After 10 minutes, filter it into another clean container. When the tea has cooled down, take a bunch of the osier or hazelnut twigs, set one end aflame, and let them burn. Now dip the blazing ends into the tea. By doing so, the material fire element has been transferred into the tea, which one can already regard as a fluid condenser. I will write about this detail in a further chapter. Now, filter this fluid condenser into another clean container. The filtering is important to remove any chips or ashes produced by dipping the burning twigs into the liquid. Pour the tea into a bowl and put it in front of you. Now inhale the fire element through the lungs or pores, or both at the same time, into your body and fill it entirely with this element. At this projection, there is no great attention to be given to the intensity of the warmth, as you will feel it in any case, but do not forget that the fire element has to bear your desire that you transferred to it through your imagination. After transferring to the fire element your desire to have your materialize strengthened and your astral light developed, project the fire element in the same way as you performed the experiment of the light accumulation, whether by way of the solar plexus or one of your hands, or your breathing, into the liquid. If you get the feeling that the projection is not sufficient, repeat the experiment several times, but no more than 7-9 times. Thereby the prepared condenser will turn into a strong essence that will not only have a very fine effect on the eyesight, but also strengthens, enlivens and develops the astral senses. Now pour the fluid condenser into a clean bottle and keep it in a cool spot. This ophthalmic fire lotion may be used for strengthening the eyesight or for magical purposes. In the case of weak eyesight, one can simply drop this liquid condenser into the eyes without any hesitation because the 2-herb combination is anti-inflammatory and an eye tonic, but for magical practice, that is, the development of the astral senses, it will suffice to moisten a piece of cotton wool wrapped in gauze or a strip of clean linen and to use it as a poultice during the experiment of animating the eyes with light. Because it is serviceable to use is to be fastened with a scarf during the exercise to prevent it from falling off. This magic operation is to be performed without the presence of other persons. One ought to try to keep the poultice as well as the essence for a certain time, so it need not demand. Space won't be a handicap to him and nothing will remain concealed before him as far as his clairvoyant eyes are concerned. 2. And with the one of clairvoyance, the faculty of the astral clairaudience is based on the fact that one is able to hear voices even at the remotest distance, and, at the same time, to understand the language of all beings. At the beginning this faculty manifests itself in thinking aloud, coming from the inside, whether from the heart region or from the solar plexus. After a long spell of exercising, the astral clairvoyance will develop to such a perfection that one can distinctly perceive everything with a supernormal hearing, similarly as if there were normal talking to anybody. This faculty is a privilege of all magicians, and without it there would scarcely be any progress in magic. For this particular reason, this type of astral clairaudience has to be handled with the same carefulness as astral seeing, and the exercises therefore must not be neglected at any rate. All that has been said about clairvoyance, about predisposition for it, about pathological symptoms will turn out to be true as well for clairaudience and clairfeeling. Let us turn now to the practice of clairaudience. For this exercise, nothing is required but a fluid condenser and a small piece of cotton wool. Make 2 small tampons from it to fit in the ear. Moisten these cotton plugs with the fluid condenser and put both of them in front of you, according to the instructions you were given. For training the astral eyes, you will now work with the air element, filling your body with it. By breathing through the lungs and pores, the whole body is assumed to be filled with air like a balloon. Imagine into this air principle the desire for the faculty of clairaudience in your astral body as well as in the material one, provided you have the inward certainty that the air element has been sufficiently impregnated with your desire and with your imagination. Project the prepared air element into the 2 cotton plugs, whether through the solar plexus, your hands, or your breath by compressing and accumulating the air element that fills your body to such a degree that it will adopt the same size as the cotton plugs. You may magically impregnate both plugs at the same time, or one at a time with the entire amount of the element. The main point of this experiment is the firm conviction and unshakable faith that this faculty is developing swiftly in you. You can use as a fluid condenser a strong decoction of chamomile flowers and distilled water. Take 2 tablespoons of chamomile flowers per cup. of water, filter them after scalding, and keep the liquid cool to prevent the fluid condenser from getting moldy. A moldy condenser is not ineffective, but it is unsanitary. When you have loaded these two cotton plugs with their element, whether simultaneously or separately, put both into your ears so that they are completely crammed. Now introduce the Akaza principle into your entire head imaginarily. Transfer your consciousness to the ear region, and imagine the faculty of absolute clairaudience. Imagine the Akaza principle introduced into your ears as instantly producing the absolute clairaudience power in you. After a long period of meditating and concentrating on this effect, dissolve the Akaza principle into the universal Akaza. Remove the cotton plugs, and keep them carefully because they must not be touched by anyone else. If the plugs fall into the hands of some incompetent person, you will have to prepare new ones for yourself. Otherwise, it will be sufficient to remove the plugs from the ears to allow the accumulated air element to dissolve again with the help of the imagination. It is obviously of greater advantage to use new cotton plugs for every experiment and to load them anew, if you can afford the necessary time. Should you like to resort to your astral sense of hearing, all you need to do is lead the Akaza in the size of your ear passages into the inner chambers of both your ears. After a long time of exercising, you will be able to use your clairaudience for your purposes. As soon as you do not need this faculty anymore, lead the Akaza in your ear back into the universal Akaza. By introducing the Akaza principle into the acoustic chambers, the mental as well as the astral hearing is influenced and developed, and you will attain to the physical clairaudience with the help of the concentrated air element. Anyone meditating intensely on this problem will instantly find the coherence and may compare the operation with the wireless, where the ether as the Akaza principle of matter and the air likewise are playing their part as transmitters of the sound waves. 3. Development of the astral clair-feeling, clairsentience. Before passing on to the development of the astral clair-feeling, let us take up our magical diary and transfer ourselves to the time when we were engaged thoroughly with the introspection of the various good and bad qualities. According to the magic mirror, we could establish then which of the qualities corresponding to the element in question were predominant in our mind. How important introspection was indeed then is clearly shown by the fact that just this preponderance of the element concerned points to our astral sensory center. If the fire element had been predominant, the sensory element was the head, to put it correctly, the forehead. If it was the air element, it is the heart. In the case of prevalence of the water element, it is the solar plexus, and if it has been the earth element, the sensory center is in the hands or the thighs. Having thus established our astral sensory area, let us pass to the practice. You have to act in exactly the same manner as you did when training the two previous senses. The necessary requisites are a piece of linen or a cotton wool plug which you moisten slightly with a fluid condenser. This condenser may again be a strong decoction of chamomile flowers. At this performance, you are loading your body once with the water element through pulmonary and pore breathing, and with the desire that this element may produce clair-feeling in you. The term clair-feeling means the faculty of perceiving and feeling all the phenomena and powers occurring in the elements and in Akaza. To this field also belongs the faculty of psychometry, the clear perception of the present, past and future of any object, even the power of materialization of any thought, any being, no matter whether the point in question is a self-created being or an entity already existing in the Akaza, belongs to this domain. Other faculties connected with sense perception and touch perception also can be registered in the category of clair-feeling. Intuition too originates in clair-feeling. These few examples may be sufficient to explain the clair-feeling power. As soon as you have accumulated the water element in the whole body through the pores and through breathing, loaded with the intense imagination of the faculty of clair-feeling, you must be absolutely sure that it is strong enough to arouse this faculty in your astral body. With the help of imagination, draw the water element from your body, whether through the solar plexus, the forehead, hand, or by breathing out, accumulating it in the cotton ball or piece of linen soaked in the fluid condenser. You may repeat the loading button no more than 7-9 times. When doing this exercise, do not take up your rounding posture, but lie down comfortably on the couch, or on the floor. The main condition is to lie rather flat, only the head remaining a little higher. To develop the astral clair-feeling, you need not utilize the water element directly, but only the magnetic attractive power of the water. Before starting the exercise, put heat fluid condenser on the predetermined sensory area. This exercise has to be performed with your eyes closed right from the beginning. Now imagine that your entire body is swimming in the universal water element, as if you were in the center of the surface of an endless ocean. You feel nothing but water. Be very attentive, for it is quite possible that you will fall asleep during this exercise in spite of all your carefulness. Make up your mind not to fall asleep, for if this should become a habit, you would have great difficulty fighting against sleep while doing your exercises. In the previously mentioned imagination, you transferred yourself with your consciousness to the sensory area. Now imagine that the magnetic power of the water you have accumulated within yourself will enliven the finest particles of your sensation field and produce the astral clear feeling. You must be able to imagine the magnetic attractive power of the water so intensely that it becomes an incontestable reality. If by long meditation you have the firm conviction that you duly enough enlivened the sensory field, dissolve the water element within your body into the universal element again, take off the fluid condenser, and reduce the concentrated element to the universal element. Now the exercise is at an end. In case you would like to use the sensation field practically at one time or another, the transfer of consciousness into this field will be sufficient to put this faculty into action immediately. To further the display of the astral senses of seeing, hearing and feeling, I deem it opportune to recommend that you continue these exercises even if you can spend only very little time on them. The real success will not be far off. We shall omit the development of the other senses, taste and smell, for the time being because they are not important enough for the practical use of any magician. It is up to the scholar now to think out a scheme for himself to develop the other senses with the help of these three training methods. The faculties acquired by this astral development of the senses are so far-reaching that there is no need at all to talk much about it. The enjoyment and the success can be compared in a way to a blind person who, deprived of eyesight for years, suddenly is able to see again. Magic physical training. 7. If the magician is able to manage the projection of elements to the outside so that he knows how to project any element he chooses out of himself or directly from the universe, he will be able to create elementaries for his own and other people's profit too. He will succeed in creating beings that will be his faithful servants not only on the mental level but on the astral and material one as well, according to his producing or condensing these beings in a mental, astral or material way. I have already talked about the deliberate or conscious creation of thought forms or elementals. The difference between an elemental and an elementary is that an elemental is produced on the basis of deliberate thought forms with the help of the magician's imagination and willpower, and works mainly on the mental plane for the magician's or other people's benefit. An elementary, on the other hand, is far more penetrating and subtle in its effect because it is being created from one or several elements. In the light of practical examples, I will explain the real procreation of an elementary as thoroughly as possible, demonstrating the manner in which the magician has to create an elementary. The intuition acquired by the previous training certainly will help the magician to contrive his own practice, responsive to the purpose he aims at. According to his ethical development, he will never dare to create elementaries for evil purposes. The invisible world would certainly vow ferocious revenge on him, because through the knowledge of how to create elementaries, the magician has got a plenitude of power which allows him to achieve anything on the mental, astral, and material level he chooses. He must always consider that it is he himself who is responsible for his deeds, and not the elementary he has created. The elementaries are compliant tools in the hands of the magician, following his orders blindly, and granting every desire to him regardless whether a bad thing has to be turned to good account or the other way around. In the same manner as you cannot expect a baker's job to be done by a carpenter, you cannot demand that an elementary created for a certain purpose will accomplish a second task for which it was not intended. For this particular reason you must never give 2 or more orders to any of the elementaries, for it will not be able to do either job well. Apart from that, the analogy to the elements is to be considered. It would be quite wrong and illegal if the magician created an elementary that would not be in harmony with the analogous elements. There are no limits to the shape of the elementary, and it is up to the magician to choose the form according to his liking and intuition. However, avoid picking the form of living or deceased people you have known or with whom you have been or still are connected. By doing so you might easily slip into the reach of the mental or astral body of the respective human being and consequently do him great damage. Apart from that, there is a danger that an elementary might turn against the magician at any moment in consequence of its inbred intelligence. It would understand perfectly how to vampirize him or to influence him indirectly when asleep, and to do any possible amount of mischief. Therefore every magician is advised to take this warning very seriously. Each elementary has to be given a name at the very moment of its creation. It is opportune to Choose less common names because the mere utterance of a name will be enough to bring the elementary near the magician at once. Supposing that one has created several elementaries, it is advisable to take notes of the names in order not to forget them. But these names must not be mentioned to anyone else because another magician, being clever enough, could easily seize the elementaries and work with them without any effort. The power and effectiveness of an elementary depends entirely on its loading. The stronger the willpower of the magician, the projection of the elements to the outside will be all the greater, and an elementary loaded to such an extent becomes all the more pervasive and far more effective, of course. Sometimes an elementary can be condensed so much that it is visible even to an untrained physical eye. It is therefore up to the magician himself whether he wants the elementary to work visibly or invisibly, as the case may be. The duration of life of an elementary depends on the purpose for which it has been created, and this purpose has to be fixed right at the beginning of its creation. As soon as the purpose is fulfilled, the magician must dissolve his elementary into its original element with the help of the imagination. Never omit this process of dissolution, because, having performed this task, an elementary can easily become independent due to its instinct of self-preservation, and if you forget to do so, it will escape from your sphere of influence and become a vampire. In this case, the magician would have to face all the resulting karma caused by such an elementary, transmuted into a vampire. Therefore, carelessness and conscientiousness are seriously recommended when you are handling elementaries. Many magicians determine, right at the birth act, the kind of disintegration of the elementary by destroying the name of the elementary in question, burning it, performing a certain rite, a sign or a gesture, or using a formula which they fixed in advance. All this is individual and is left to the magician's choice. Special attention has to be paid to the act of disintegration. Provided the magician is equal to the task, he will be able to force his elementaries to absolute obedience at any time by threatening them with disintegration. At all events, he should imprint on his mind that he is able to bring the elementaries under his will and to have complete command of them. This is very important if the magician does not wish himself to become the plaything of the beings he created. He will make the experience all the better, and the elementary will serve him all the more faithfully and reliably. It will become all the more engaging, and he will hate to dissolve it at all. But the magician must never give way to this sentimentalism, because he would get into the thrall of elementaries. For this reason, it is more opportune to destine elementaries for a short life, and to create new ones for the same purpose if need be. This does not mean, of course, that a new elementary should be created every week, but it is a disadvantage to keep the same elementary for years for one affair only. Should the magician intends to create elementaries for his own use, he had better form them by the projection of elements through his body. Elementaries destined for other people, however, should be created by the projection of elements directly from the universe. The magician knows very well that there is an invisible connection between him and every elementary that could be misused very easily if he started to create elementaries by physical projection for other human beings as well. The way to manage it will be quite understandable to every magician without any doubt. It is necessary to talk about the places where elementaries should be deposited. In the Orient, elementaries, they're called yutams, are banished into a kailiker where they are preserved. A kailiker is a diagram built from stone and corresponding to the yutam to which no stranger will ever be admitted. The well-trained magician, however, needs no separate place for it, but he will hide the elementary in a spot in the wall, realizing that an elementary is not limited to time, nor does it claim a special space. Hence it will be quite alright in the wall as well as it would have been accommodated in an open space. It is even more suitable to keep it in a wall, or any solid big object, because it is better to avoid banning it to places where other people are about all the time. Should a human being happen to come to the same place where an elementary is kept, the person would suddenly feel restless and other bad consequences might occur. Furthermore, it has to be fixed right at the beginning how the elementary ought to be called up. This can be done by whispering the name or thinking of it, or by a gesture of the hand, or a ritual. The magician is at liberty to do as he pleases. Before I particularize the practical part, the proper act of creation, I should like to remark that it is not necessary for the magician to restrict himself to this practice, this being only a small part of practical magic and a hint as to how the magician is to use his power. He should not specialize thereat. On the contrary, if he is able to manage these practices perfectly, further possibilities are at his disposal. This part of magic is to be followed only in the beginning. and it is up to the magician to utilize it to help himself and other people too. And last but not least, that is the purpose of this theme. 1. The act of creation. There are 4 fundamental methods devised for the creation act of elementary. 1. The projection of one element into a ready form, no matter whether the point in question be a mental, astral or material form. 2. The projection of several elements into a ready form, which may be a mental, astral or material form. 3. The projection of one element without any direct form, which will be produced by the element in question. 4. The projection of several elements, which will produce their forms successively. I will explain all the 4 methods thoroughly in the light of practical examples. Method 1. Take any object of which you want to give the form to the elementary, and put it in front of you. Choose for example a ball, no matter whether it is big ball of wood or glass, solid or hollow inside. A rather large rubber ball will do as well. Draw the desired element from the universe with the help of your imaginative faculty and imagine it in the form that you chose, in such a way that the shape of the object is completely filed. Treat each element you want to work with in the same manner, except a causa, and always engage that element which best responds to your desire or idea. Repeat this projection several times, each time imagining the sensation that more and more elemental matter is forming, accumulating and compressing. As soon as you are quite sure that this accumulation of the element is strong enough for the realization of your desire, impregnate this already completed elementary with the concentrated desire or purpose you aim at. Apart from that, give a name to the elementary, because it cannot exist without a name. At the same time, limit the period of its lifetime, during which it has to fulfill its task. Supposing that you operated with the element of fire, the outcome would be a fire elementary and you have got a fiery ball. If it has been created from the water element, the ball will be similar to a glass ball, created from the air element. The ball will have a bluish color, and when produced from the earth element, the elementary will appear clay-colored. Provided that you followed all these instructions, draw the elementary out of the object and send it on to the job you selected to be done. But beforehand, order the elementary to go back into its shape immediately after having fulfilled its task. In this manner, you have the possibility of checking the elementary, whether or not it has done its job, by approaching the form with the pendulum. If the elementary has returned into the original form after finishing its work, the pendulum will present vibrations because such an elementary has a remarkable magnetic as well as electrical radiation. The pendulum test is very important for you, as it demonstrated whether your order has or has not been executed. Later on, after having acquired the maturity, you will be able to watch the work of your elementary by clairvoyance. If the pendulum does not show any vibration, it will prove that the elementary still is working, because the job is not yet finished. When sending off the elementary to do its piece of work, do not forget that there are no bounds for an elementary. Neither time nor space can put obstacles in the way of an elementary, and it would be able to go around the globe in an instant if necessary. You have to be firmly convinced that it will execute your order and obey your will within the time you have fixed, without any exception. Not the slightest doubt about the success must ever enter your mind. As soon as you have forwarded the elementary, cut off the connecting link between you and it as suddenly as if you had used a knife, and stop thinking of it instantly after sending it off. You may have to transfer yourself into a state of vacancy of mind, or give your attention to quite another matter. In short, you must forget your elementary altogether. The more skillfully you manage this, the more pervasively and undisturbed the elementary will work. If the time you had fixed beforehand has expired, make certain with the help of the pendulum that the elementary has returned into its form. If so, you can then dissolve the elementary in the way you previously determined, namely by burning its name, with the help of a special ritual, or by spelling its name backwards in an undertone. This disintegration or dissolution also can be performed through the normal imagination, similar to the method we recommended for the projection of elements. You may use the elementary for the same purpose somewhere else too, if you like. If your elementary has not returned to the form it is preserved in, after the team you set, and if you suppose that your order has not been fulfilled satisfactorily, just call back the elementary. Produce a more intense accumulation of the element by reinforced imagination and projection of the respective element, and then send the elementary off once more to do the required job. You may repeat this loading as many times as you like until the desired effect has been accomplished. Such a repetition of the loading will be necessary when you bring your elementary up against a problem that would exceed its tension and power. Moreover, you have to consider that the effectiveness of an elementary depends on your own mental maturity. and consequently on your ability to condense an element. It also depends on your will, your conviction and your emanative faith, which is able to move mountains. This is the most artless and easiest method of creating elementaries, which the magician is using for simple effects only, narrowly limited ideas and influences that do not require any special intelligence. For example, to give an order to another person, to offer protection in simple affairs, etc. As mentioned before, mental, astral, and material effects can be achieved with the help of elementaries. In the manner quoted here, an elementary can be produced without any material shape as well. In such a case, one has to project the desired element into a form of thoughts, operating in exactly the same way you did in the material production. This kind of creation of elementaries is more difficult, it is true, but it has the advantage that the form also can be transferred somewhere else, where a material body would not have enough space, for example, into a corner of the wall and into such spots where the meddling of other people is quite out of the question.
Baby, that's all.
This practice offers so many possibilities for the magician that it is left entirely to his intuition to what purposes he likes to use the elementaries he creates. He can, for example, shield his house or apartment from injuries with the help of an elementary, produce a more favorable atmosphere for himself, and similar things. All of us know that every science can be used for noble purposes as well as for evil ones, and so I am sorry to say, this practice likewise can be misused for egotistic and malevolent purposes. For example, a merchant can create an elementary that will aid him in increasing the number of his customers. All the haunted houses, discredited as such by spiteful magicians, may be interpreted as a production of elementaries deliberately created for such malicious purposes. A respectable magician will never degrade himself for such kind of machinations. Method 2. Although, according to this method, you may choose any object whatever, such as a statue, doll, or such as a suitable form for your elementary, I shall also acquaint you with a very ideal secret practice. Take 2 parts by volume of loam and 1 part of wax. Stir the loam with some warm water to a thick pulp and add the beeswax, either completely melted or warmed to softness. Knead both ingredients until they are very well mixed. Do not use too much water to prepare the loam, or else the mass will turn out too soft and it would be difficult to operate with. If genuine beeswax is not available, any other fatty or waxy ingredient will do, such as tallow and the like, which are generally used for making candles. This would be a last resort, because beeswax is much better. Now form a figure, giving it the shape you want the elementary to have, such as a human form. With a large nail or other pointed object, sink a wide opening while the doll is still warm and soft. Begin with the head and move down along the spine to the feet, producing a large hollow inside the figure. Now fill this space up to the opening with a fluid condenser, and stop the opening while the figure is still soft to prevent the condenser from leaking out. Another way is to pour the condenser into the figure after it has cooled down and hardened, stopping the opening with liquid wax or with a candle. As to the treatment of magic condensers, I shall enlarge on this subject in a special chapter. If the magician intends to create the elementary for his own purposes only, he has to stop the opening of the figure with a cotton wool plug containing a few drops of his own organic prima material. This is the alpha and omega. Therefore take a few drops of your own blood or sperm. In our case, one or the other would be sufficient, but if both Mumai of the first class were connected, it would be still more effective. Supposing a female magician is concerned, a drop of her own blood serves the same purpose. The cotton wool plug prepared in this manner has to be put first into the hollow of the figure, pouring the fluid condenser over it, only then, not before, and finally stopping the opening. According to the magic rules, a figure like this is the most ideal form to create an elementary. The size of the figure does not matter at all, although it is evident that the bigger the doll, the more fertile will be your creative imagination. But a figure approximately 4 inches will do for a skilled magician. In case an elementary has to be created and a doll to be shaped for another person, the own prima materia is not to be mixed with the fluid condenser, otherwise serious damage will be done to the magician, the respective person, in consequence of the me. Step 8. Magic Mental Training. 8. In Step 8 I am going to deal with a chapter that is of great importance in magic. I mean the problem of leaving the body, or the separation of the mental and later on the astral body from the material one. Every magician who has been working conscientiously in the magic art must hone this faculty, because it offers